what a lot of guys do, and I've got a really good friend of mine that I work with on his two-handling all the time, and he goes and spends a week on the Dean River every year and has done for the last 20 years. And he's got one guy that goes up with him and has done that for the last 20 years. Well, the guy that he goes up with, Tony, my friend, catches more fish than anyone else by hands down, double, triple, whatever you want, any qualifier that you want to attach to it. And the reason he does it, he uses smaller, quieter patterns, and he goes and slides in behind guys that have already fished a run with prom dresses and intruders and great big, bushy, gaudy, pink and purple and rust-colored metallic beasts. The fish see the smaller things, and they respond more classically to them. They really, really do like how they look as opposed to the big flashy stuff when the flashy stuff has been run in front of them for day after day after day. The materials that I'm going to show you tonight are going to be softer and quieter than the big flashy ones. I'm going to have to reach behind me here in a second and grab some things, but I'm going to be using softer colored materials. Now in the slide presentation I showed some classics like a Lady Caroline. It's a spay fly and used bronze over the top, and it's really a beautiful pattern. It also uses heron hackles, which are illegal, but we could also use like blue-eared pheasant as a substitute, or dyed pheasant rump. I'm going to use just simple materials. I'm going to use a brown bear for a wing. I'm going to use a combination of a small amount of gold tinsel and a few other things to add a little bit of flash, but not to make the thing really dramatic and gaudy. The other thing that I want to keep in mind is that I don't want this fly to be real heavy and massive and dense in its quality. I want it to be light. So we've got this attached, the thread's ready to go. I'm going to find a nice straight section. This looks like I need to seam this again. Whenever you cut material off from a skin, you always want to pull it off perpendicular to the skin before you cut it. This gives it a preliminary stack. Now, you never ever, for a steelhead fly or anything like this, a screamer, you don't want to ever stack the hair. It's great for dry fly wings, but not for this. You do not want some really abrupt finish. This needs to be soft and gentle looking, and having the fibers stacked isn't a way to do that. So I'm going to stick this off perpendicular, and I'm going to cut off a section. I'm going to pull off a bunch of the fluff, but not necessarily all of it. A little bit helps actually keep the material separated. I'm going to look in here for some blunts. Actually, because blunts, which are just sections that have been broken through wear and tear, if there's one in there, they're actually real easy to pull out because they're fatter. In fact, there's one right there. Let's see if I can get it easily. Out it came. Yep, just two of them. I grabbed one extra, but because they're fatter than the normal tips, you actually grab them very easily. Now I'm going to sort of align these fibers. You don't want to use too much for this style of winging. Now, remember I talked about how I had the loop open, cleared it of, if I turn it this way, Zena, can you see? Okay, so you can see if I can get rid of, what color is that? There we go. So you can see it's open, right? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to shove this stuff inside that gap. I'm going to actually lay it down flat, and there it is. Almost all of it is inside. Just sitting there, ready to go. I'm going to pull it out a little longer, and I'm going to do an oblique turn over the top, and I'm going to measure for length. It's too long, so I'm going to shorten it up. It's still too long. Oops, thread's sliding, so I'm going to do it this way. Not bad, we'll go there. Okay, I'm going to bind this down, and I'm going to trim these things off on a long angle. Just like that. So really the long angle starts about there, and you can see where it ends here. The whole idea is it's going to fall off, and I'm going to be able to wrap over that, and I'm going to have a smooth drop off. By tying in this wing this way first, by the way, this is a technique that was developed by Ed Haas, a really well-known steelhead tyer, passed away not too long ago. It's virtually indestructible. I mean, you almost can't even pull the dang stuff out. The other thing that's really cool about this is I can set the angle of the wing. if I'm in really, really heavy water and I know that the wing's going to get pushed down by the current, I can set the wing higher so that when the current does hit it, that it doesn't turn into just a stick. It actually still has some body to it. If I'm in really low water and I know that the current's not going to flatten it out, now I can bring the material farther down. If you also like to do hackle tip wings like the classic Silver Hilton, this is a great way. You don't slide it in between, you actually bind the loop die together like you would when you normally do it, but you lay the hackle tips on top with the bare shank with the tips going forward, and then you can fold them back and do the wing later. In fact, there might be, yeah, there is a Silver Hilton right here in the box. I'm going to stick it up in front of the vise here in a second so you can see. But there it is with the hackle tip wings splayed back over the body. And they were tied in going front first and then laid back. If the wings stick up too much like this, then you use the lance that I showed you earlier, stick it underneath, and actually bend the feather gently several times, like there, 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 and then press here, and it'll actually stick them down closer to the body. So you can cheat and kind of trim and primp and preen these things as you go. As you tie flies more and more and more, you realize that the things that we do, there's a million ways that we can cheat the techniques and actually make them work to our advantage. It's part of what makes it really fun, actually. There's so many different things that you can do. You'll also realize the more you get involved with this, that there's really not much new in fly tying. It's just regurgitation of the same things over and over again with slightly different materials or whatever's in vogue for that particular point in time. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tie in, look for a little bit, this is awful thin stuff. Just one second. I told myself I was going to do this before, and I didn't. Much better. I'm just getting some ribbing material that's a little thicker in diameter, so it'll show up a little bit better for all of you. This is really old tinsel, and it's in bad shape, but it'll work just fine for what we want tonight. Now I'm going to tie in the tinsel now with our technique of just sliding it in. And I tie this material in on the back side, not on the bottom, not on top, but on the back side towards you guys. The reason is that as I wind down, I want it, because I'm going to be wrapping this over with another material, I don't want to create vertical bulk. I don't mind side to side bulk, but I don't want it to get too thin or too tall this way. This is the way that the fish sees it, not necessarily this way. So I want to make sure that this body stays as thin as I possibly can keep it. Okay? I'm going to put this in my material clips and keep it out of the way, and I'm going to grab some mylar. This is plain old flat mylar, silver on one side, gold on the other. We're going to use the silver side. Okay? And I'm going to cut a notch in this. Pardon my finger. I'll show you the notch when I'm done, I promise. Okay, can you see the notch? See how I've cut that little sliver out of it? Okay, what that does is that, one, when I tie this in and get ready to start winding, it actually allows the mylar to create that first perfect wrap because it's cut at an angle, and it actually allows the whole thing to get started and laying the material edge to edge. And I'm going to harp on this all the way along. The other thing that it does is it creates a jam on the other side, so if I pull too hard, hopefully I won't pull it out. That's frustrating too. Now, anytime that you work with flat mylar, I don't care, or flat tinsel, I don't care if it's plastic, which is what this is, or if it's the real deal, it needs to be edge to edge, no overlap. Okay? No overlap. The reason is it's smoother and it does a better job if you do a butt joint. And you always wrap down and back. How many people have seen the old classic Carrie Stevens streamer flies from way back when. Beautiful flat bodies done with mylar or with actual tinsel, embossed or whatever. She always did 2 rows, up and back. Or down, whoops, see, I just popped it. Okay, so let's start over. I hit the thread with my fingers, so I'll have to start over. So you get to watch this twice. Okay. Butt joint, edge to edge, no overlap. That's what the fish's teeth can catch and grab on. But it also just looks so slim and nice and slinky. Remember, this pattern is intended to be low profile, almost stealth. Every time I turn, as I pull this way, I literally slide it right off and it drops down and butts up against the preceding wrap. It's all as farther I need to go. And I'm doing this for a reason. One, I'm keeping the tinsel underneath because I'm going to use that as a rib later on. It's going to look really nice. And it also is going to help protect the body and whatever I do afterwards. But I'm also going to use this to help add a little bit of glow. Now, I know I've been harping on this fly being quiet and stealthy, but I also want to show you a technique that is something that you can use with a lot of other flies, whether it's saltwater flies, steelhead flies, or whatever. So I'm going to use a little bit less bilious color. It'll be an orange, but a duller orange. I thought I had an orange in here. Yeah, I do. My example prior to the meeting was, what color does the red floss in a Royal Coachman turn once it gets red? Dark red, right? Maroon, almost black. But it isn't red, not red like you and I know. Not fire engine red. And that may be fine for a Royal Coachman, but if you really want to see color, you need to try to do something to keep it from changing color when it gets wet. By tying in the mylar underneath, I now have created an effect where when I wrap this floss on top, just a short little spurt of it, oops, it will glow. Absolutely, positively glow when it's wet. Let me pull this back and get it. I'm going a little too far with it. There we go. I just want a small amount, nice and smooth. Now, where I harped on edge to edge with the flat tinsel, anytime you work with floss, you want to think of it as a super, super, super long football. And it's the middle point that you want to try to match, so you overlap about 30 to 40% in order to keep that thing nice and smooth. You also want to try to get the floss as flat as possible. Now I'm just going to clean up the back ends here. That's all the floss I'm going to use. And I'm going to use some of the, let's use mahogany. This is African goat. It's a seal substitute. It's great stuff. I think I bought this, from Orbis in about 1967 or 68. And I've had it all this time. And believe me, I've used a lot of it over the years. African goat is a very spiky, kind of a wiry looking material. And a lot of people find that it's difficult to dub. The key, anytime that you're working with a material like this, is wetting your finger and then drying it off with another finger so that it becomes really, really, really sticky and tacky. You don't want it to be wet. That's not the idea. You want grip. When I do this and dub this into the thread, that's exactly what I'm thinking. I'm dubbing it into the thread, not onto the thread. I'm really grinding. I'm also going to do another technique to create an effect that I want on this particular pattern. So I'm really grinding it in. I'm actually using a lot of force. I don't care too much about what's down here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to wind backwards up to the top. That was away towards you. And I'm going to slide this dubbing down like this. Now I'm going to go back away towards me. I'm going to shove the nose of the bobbin inside the dubbing, and I'm going to twist clockwise. Excuse me, counterclockwise. And I'm going to tighten up the strands, and I'm going to wind. Now it's separated a little bit, so we'll just go back, do this. But the reason why I did that is I created a very tight little rope, which gave me a great start on a nice skinny back end. Need a little bit more grip. If you have to do multiple times when you or add additional material, that's no big deal. There we go. And we're done. Pretty cool. Okay, we've got this ready. We're going to do some hackle in a minute. This will be really nice. Now let's go ahead and wind this. Okay, traditionally, salmon flies, steelhead flies, 5 turns of hackle. I'm going to do a couple of turns down here at the base to create a tag. 5 is just because it looks better proportionally. Here's my first turn in the middle. Second turn on the silver to orange joint. This is as I'm looking at it. It'll look a little different to you. Third turn at the orange and brown. 4 in the middle. 5 at the top. We're out. Yep, that's too far. Forget it. We're going back. The idea, too, is to try to make this look nice and smooth and even. I didn't do that. So actually what I'm going to do is, because my proportions on my floss is shorter than normal, I'm going to hit this in the middle, create that, and one right there, and now we're in better position and we're finished. Okay. Good. Now, the next 2 things I'm going to do before we fold the wing back and call this fly done is we're going to talk a little bit about hackle. A lot of people these days love using saddle hackles. In fact, most people, when they use saddle hackles, when they think of in terms of salmon flies, they think saddle hackles are the way to go. They are not. The best material that you can use is actually what we call a Chinese cut or a Philippine cut neck. They're a poor grade rooster neck, quality C, D, or E, but they're still a rooster. They're still nice and shiny. And I like to use those as the first hackle with a dull hackle, not a hen neck, but say like guinea fowl on top or pheasant rump. The combination of the two creates a little texture. It also creates some brightness and some translucency that the fish seem to like. Let me get a hackle here. I was looking for a hot orange. Oh, that'll work. Hopefully it's not too stiff. I remember this neck isn't that great because you almost select these necks the same way that you would dry fly, good quality dry fly necks. You look at the length. You also look at more importantly, you look at the stem thickness. If it's a really thick, stiff stem, it causes problems in the way that you actually tie the fly. It binds up. And this stem I can see right now is really pretty thick. So I'm going to try to use the front end. In fact, you can see I got a great big notch there. I think I'm going to throw this one out and grab one other one because I'm finicky. Bear with me just 1 second, folks. That looks better right there. It's a little shorter, a little thinner stemmed. Whenever you tie in a hackle for something like this, try to work tip first. Now I like to fold hackles, which is taking the hackles on the fibers on this side and shoving them over to this side. And that will allow me to tie with the fibers pulling back with fewer wraps of thread. They will naturally go back to the back. Now I've got a lot of bulk right here, so it may not work quite as well as it did when we tied the one earlier, but it still should work pretty well. Now, what I'll do is I'm going to fold this now and not really give you a close-up, but when we're all finished, and before I wrap up and go home, I will give everyone a full lights on demonstration of how to fold hackles. How's that? Because it really does help once you learn how to do this. Okay, there we go. It's going over. And I broke off the stem, but that's okay, because I can still use a small amount and get this done. Okay, tie it in. I'm just setting the direction. I always want the hackle fibers to actually go down in towards the body, and there it is, without forcing it, laying back naturally over the back end of the fly. Just a couple of turns, that's all I want. I'm going to trim off this stuff. Now I'm going to use an orange dyed guinea fowl feather, fold it, and tie a couple of turns of it as a front hackle. Guinea fowl feathers come in two versions, surprisingly enough. We have single dots and we have double dots, and I'm going to show you the difference between the two. It should be fairly obvious just by the name, but when you see the feather you'll really understand. Let's see if I can find a good double, because that's what I want to use as a double dot if I can. The single dots look like this. Pretty stark. Now this is the orange dyed. They're normally just black and white. Let me find a double and you can see the difference. In fact, here's a very small double. You can see it's much less stark, and there's actually a ring or a halo around the white, and then it lightens up behind the edge. They look a little nicer. They're not quite as stark. And again, this pattern is supposed to be quieter, so we're going to use it. So here's one that's not too bad. I'm going to fold it. Oops, started going the wrong way. There we go. Perfect. Again, we're just going to do a couple of turns. This is a little longer, but it's also lighter and a kind of spidery. Okay. Now we're going to fold the wing back. I'm going to literally try to crush and break some of its resistance. And yeah, I am squeezing hard. Okay. And I'm just going to wind right on up. Trying to do nice clean turns. This material is a little on the stiff side, so it's going to take a little bit more thread to do this. Now if I wanted to set a high wing, I could leave it like that for fast water, but I'm going to flatten it right on down. So you just walk it right up onto the wing until we get to the point where it looks more like that. Cool. Nice. Whip finish. 3 turns. If it was a really large fly, I might do a double 3. There we go.
Hey John?
Yes, sir.
I'm pretty sure you submit your heads on your steelhead flies and your salmon flies.
Mm-hmm.
Do you do the same on your trout flies?
No, I hardly ever do a head cement on trout flies for whatever reasons. I don't think they, I really don't think it's necessary, but when I do, the material that I use is I go to the, to Walgreens or whatever. I get Sally Hansen's Hard as Nails with nylon and use it. It's great head cement for anything. It's just, and the only drawback with it is that the longer you keep it, after say about 2 years, it starts to turn yellow, which in most cases doesn't really cause any problems, but if you're trying to use lighter colored heads, it might actually discolor them. But there it is, very simple. Nice. Any questions? Then we can turn the lights on, I can show you some techniques up here, and we can call it an evening. How's that?